Latest developments: Iran, United States, and Israel escalate, then step back from the brink. Welcome to our in-depth coverage of the latest crisis in the Middle East, where tensions between Iran, the United States, and Israel have reached levels not seen in years. In the past week, a series of military strikes, counterstrikes, and high-stakes diplomacy have shaken the region and the world. Here's a comprehensive breakdown of what happened, why it matters, and what might come next, drawing on reports from Middle Eastern, European, and American media. The spark that ignited the crisis. The current escalation began when the United States launched airstrikes on three major Iranian nuclear facilities: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan over the weekend. The strikes were a response to what the U.S. described as Iranian threats and activities related to its nuclear program. President Donald Trump warned Tehran that further aggression would be met with even more force.
Three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror.
Iranian state media responded with a chilling warning. Every American citizen or military personnel in the Middle East is now on Tehran's target list. Iranian TV broadcast graphics showing U.S. bases in the region under the label "Within the Fire Range of Iran." Iran's retaliation missiles rained down. On Monday, Iran retaliated by launching a barrage of missiles at the Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, which houses around 10,000 U.S. troops. Iran's military claimed the strike was a direct response to the U.S. bombing of its nuclear sites. Notably, Iran gave advance warning to Qatar, which allowed U.S. forces to prepare and avoid casualties. This warning also led to the lifting of a shelter-in-place order at the U.S. Embassy in Doha. Shortly after the attack, Qatar reopened its civilian airspace, and global markets reacted with relief, hoping that Iran's response would be limited and not trigger a wider war. Oil prices, which had spiked on fears of a broader conflict, began to fall as the situation stabilized. Israel enters the fray. As the U.S. and Iran exchanged blows, Israel launched its own strikes against Iranian government targets, further escalating the conflict. Iran responded by firing a wave of ballistic missiles at Israel, with some hitting civilian areas and causing casualties. Israeli emergency services reported at least 17 injuries after an Iranian strike on Haifa, and a major medical center was hit, though Iran claimed it was targeting an intelligence hub nearby. Israel's defense minister declared that Iran's supreme leader must not be allowed to continue to exist following the attack on the hospital, signaling the depth of Israeli anger and the risk of further escalation. Diplomatic frenzy. Europe and Russia step in. European leaders scrambled to prevent the conflict from spiraling out of control. European Union foreign ministers met in Brussels, expressing deep concern about the risk of a wider war and global economic instability. The E3, Britain, France, and Germany, attempted to revive diplomatic talks with Iran, but Tehran refused to negotiate while under attack. Italy proposed hosting talks in Rome, while Germany and the UK urged Iran to return to the table. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister traveled to Moscow to meet President Vladimir Putin, who condemned the U.S. strikes and offered Russian mediation. The diplomatic efforts were complicated by the Trump administration's lack of coordination with European allies, some of whom were not notified in advance of the U.S. strikes. French officials warned against any attempts at regime change in Iran, calling such ideas dangerous and illusory. The ceasefire, a fragile pause. After days of violence, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that Israel and Iran had agreed to a complete and total ceasefire set to begin around midnight Eastern Time on Tuesday. Iranian state media confirmed that a ceasefire had been imposed on the enemy after Iran's military response, though the exact terms remain unclear. However, the truce was shaky. As the deadline approached, Iran continued to launch missiles at Israel, and Israeli air raid sirens sounded even after the supposed start of the ceasefire. Iranian officials stated that their operations would continue until Israel stopped its attacks, and only then would Tehran halt its own strikes. Unanswered questions and the road ahead. Despite the ceasefire, both sides remain on high alert. Air defense systems are still active in Iran, and commercial flights in and out of Israel remain suspended. Both the Israeli and Iranian governments have yet to make detailed public statements about the truce, and the risk of renewed violence lingers. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting, but failed to reach a consensus, reflecting deep international divisions over the conflict. Meanwhile, President Trump touted his role in brokering the ceasefire, claiming both Israel and Iran came to me seeking peace. Conclusion: a region on edge. The past week's events have left the Middle East and the world on edge. The rapid escalation between Iran, the U.S., and Israel shows how quickly old rivalries can ignite into open conflict, even as diplomatic channels remain strained. With both sides claiming victory and warning of further action if provoked, the situation remains volatile. We'll continue to monitor developments and bring you updates as the story unfolds. For now, the guns are silent, but the underlying tensions remain unresolved, and the world watches anxiously for what comes next.